Who is to blame when it comes to this environmental issues? So environmental scapegoating has been a really big issue within the environmentalist slash green capitalism and, environmental corporatist parts of the United States, especially, but also worldwide. Since 1988, I wanted to note that 71% of global greenhouse gas emissions have been traced back to 100 fossil fuel companies. More emissions in the last 28 years have occurred than in the 237 prior to 1988. So we have the smoking gun. We know what is causing it. At least the vast majority. If you're looking at this from a Pareto standpoint of 20% causes 80% of the issues, we have way smaller than 20% of companies slash, organizations and people causing nearly 80% of the emissions. We know who to go. We know what to do. And also it's important to note that for the rest of this conversation, in case anyone doesn't know, plastic is a product that is made from coal, oil, natural gas, and is heavily involved in carbon emissions. So the most notable example, I want to hit on a few examples, but the most notable example that probably is in the forefront of our minds as just people living everyday lives is the straw ban. And first off, I want to say paper straws suck. I mean, I think everyone agrees on that. They're terrible. And starting in 2018, after there was a disturbing video that was actually originally uploaded in 2015, but in 2018 is when it became viral. And I'm sure a lot of us have seen it. I'm not going to show it on here because it's not that easy to watch. But basically, there was a video of a sea turtle with a plastic straw lodged in one of its nostrils. And this caused a lot of backlash and got a lot of press from, like Greenpeace and other environmental organizations, posting at places to try and raise awareness of some of the problems that, plastic straws cause. And because of this, there was a ton of press around getting rid of plastic straws. They were banned within some cities in several states, including my state of California, Washington State. Seattle was actually the first ones to do it, and then Washington, D.C. as well. And they at least had it where even if they weren't totally banned, it was that you had to ask for a straw as opposed to it being, automatically given to you like it has been customarily in the past. And this definitely is, something that it has a net positive of not using as much plastic straws. However, this is definitely scapegoating consumers. Because the reality is that straws are nowhere near enough. Like, we need to hold the companies that are actually responsible accountable. Because it's silly. We're worrying about something that's super small. Now, it is a good first step, in my opinion, of normalizing trying to, create legislation that will, regulate companies before it even gets to the consumer, because I do think that is something that is required for this, because these companies have no incentive to spend more money. It makes no sense. That's the opposite of capitalism. Their goal is to minimize their cost and maximize their profits. That's why they've been doing it, and that's why, as long as they have the option, they will continue to do it. And I also want to keep in mind that, it's great to recycle. We all should, but recycling isn't going to solve the problem either, because the process of recycling, even if you recycle everything, about only 9% of the plastic that you recycle will actually be recyclable. I think it's 79% of it will end up getting lost in the process of of recycling it, and about 12% will end up getting burnt off as extra. And yeah, it's not. You're adding quite a bit while only getting a little bit back. And in 2015, 7.6 billion people in the world, right? An average of 88 pounds of plastic are gone through annually by each person. So I think we do need to normalize not using plastic if we're able to, but it starts at the top. And I think the EPA has done a good job of putting out their general tagline, which is reduce, reuse, recycle. So as an example, just using a refillable container is you're using a lot less plastic just by having that and not, having to have new containers all the time. And that, while it may be very small, is definitely a net positive. Now, this is not new, like blaming consumers. In 1971, and I'm going to share that with you guys. In 1971, there was an ad that came out, and you should be able to see now. And in 1971, there was an ad that came out, and this is a commercial called by the organization Keep America Beautiful, and I'm going to play that real quick.
Some people have a deep, abiding respect for the natural beauty that was once this country. And some people don't. People start pollution. People can stop it. Right for pollution.
Cool. And so that's the commercial. Now, this was in 1971 was when this was made. And so the tagline, right? The ad is by Keep America Beautiful, and the tagline is "People start pollution, people can stop it." Well, Keep America Beautiful was a nonprofit group funded, actually, ironically, by Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, and Anheuser-Busch, which, of course, were some of the biggest producers of cheap single-use plastic bottles in the United States. And to add insult to injury, the Native American in the video is famously known to be played by an Italian-American actor. So all kinds of cringe there. But this is a really famous commercial, and it's a pretty good classic example of, scapegoating the average person, who may litter, which littering is horrible and you're a terrible human being if you do that. But that's not what's causing the issue. It's the bottling company has a little bit more to do with that. And that was kind of the message is, that it's your problem. It's not the company's mass producing this stuff. And then the other one that's really famous is the BP ad campaign, Beyond Petroleum. So in the early 2000s, BP, the oil company, promoted the idea of the carbon footprint. And I'm sure we've all heard of this. We've all probably said it at some point in our lives without really knowing the origin behind it. But essentially, they had they made this thing called the carbon footprint, and they made a carbon footprint calculator because they wanted people to be able to go and calculate their carbon footprint and see, how much, whether or not they could cut down on their carbon emissions. And I'm going to share that with y'all real quick. And so, yeah, so that was in the early 2000s. In 2004 is when they made the carbon footprint calculator. This is a tweet from them. And this is from October of 2019, because they're still doing the hashtag carbon footprint, where you can, click on your new calculator, their new calculator, and share your pledge today to cut down on your carbon emissions. Meanwhile, BP well, first of all, let's level up real quick. In 2004, they made this, right? 6 years later, in 2010, what were they doing? They were spilling hundreds of millions of gallons of oil in the Gulf Coast. I don't know. I don't feel like my carbon footprint is necessarily what BP needs to be worrying about. And then also from 2005, because again, carbon footprint calculator in 2004, from 2005 to 2019, BP's oil production, right? Are y'all ready for this? Are y'all ready for how much they've cut down on their carbon footprint? It has decreased from 4 million gallons per year to 3.8 million gallons per year. Yeah. So not it seems like BP might not be using that calculator often enough. I think they might be a little bit a little slacking here. Now, all that said, it's definitely important for us as individuals to make sure that we, cut down on our use of plastic and things like that when we're capable. But we really need to understand that a lot of the time, these things that seem environmental, coming from big corporations, they don't have the same interest that we have. And I think that's something that's very important to keep in mind. Now, on top of this, which is, blaming consumers and individuals, which I have a real problem with, especially like, okay, we're on YouTube. Well, you'll see different influencers, especially like travel oriented influencers that'll post, some video. And this is like, we're talking about someone with like, millions of subscribers. They're making a full-time income on YouTube. And they're posting, about how they live, without plastic for, 30 days or 90 days or a year or whatever. And while this is not like, this is, yes, of course, a net positive that they're able to do that. However, that's not realistic for the average person. The average person is not capable of spending the extra money in order to make those choices. Whereas these companies are, and that's why we need to hold them accountable. Next topic on here, on the environmental scapegoating is, so we have blaming consumers. We also have blaming other countries. So our president, let me switch real quick for you. Yeah, so our president, as a classic example of this, sent out this beautiful tweet of the concept of global warming was created by and for the Chinese in order to make U.S. manufacturing non-competitive. Now, first of all, while this was a pretty good response, while that's patently false, especially since it was European scientists that were the most prominent that first came up with this idea publicly of climate change, it's a real issue because, again, it's scapegoating. It's not going to solve any problems. The National Resources Defense Council in our DC is where I'm going to be talking about most of this information from, and I'll have that link down below. But basically, we have people, like our president, blaming India and China, saying that they are the biggest CO2 emitters, and that, they need to get their stuff in line before we need to do anything because, it's only going to hurt our economy. Well, the biggest CO2 emitters by country are China, the US, India, and the European Union. Those four governments, since the EU is, of course, comprised of different countries, those four governments make up 60% of total global emissions. That's pretty staggering. Now, it's about half the world's population, so it's not as far out of the a range that you would necessarily expect. However, the claim that it's China and India doesn't really hold up when you actually look at the data. As an example, Americans on average, so per capita, emit about 8 times more than the average Indian and about 2 times more than the average Chinese person. And overall, the U.S. is 3 times the global per capita average when it comes to carbon emissions. So this glass house is looking pretty fragile. So our current administration, both in the White House and in the Houses of Congress, has rejected a clean power plan, pushed against a Green New Deal. Even Nancy Pelosi, who a lot of people that probably are upset about what I've just talked about with our president, have disdain for. She even called the Green New Deal the Green Dream or whatever. So this is a bipartisan denial of what we, the problems that we need to fix. And then we're also getting out of the 2015 Paris Agreement, which was a 200 nation deal. So the largest of all time deal on cutting down on climate change. And currently it's slated that we will get out of it come this November fully, assuming that the same, administration is in that White House. Specifics on the Paris Agreement. So again, Trump claims that India and China are doing nothing, and that was the problem. That was his proposed problem with the Paris Agreement, was that they aren't doing as much. They're asking more from us, and it's a bad deal for the United States. Now, the problem with that is that when it comes to China, China's already the world leader in new installations of wind and solar power. So, yeah. And then also they have committed to not having carbon emissions peak after 2030, which, is at least a step in the right direction. With India, you have an increasing share of non-fossil fuel energy consumption, and they have set as their terms of that agreement is to get that to 40% of non-fossil fuel energy consumption by 2030, meaning 40% of their energy would be non-fossil fuel. For perspective, the U.S. is only 20%. So the U.S. is half of that. Now, granted, that's of course what they're working towards. But if we're not having a goal, then they'll pass us. So again, doesn't really seem like there's much weight to these claims. And meanwhile, I think it's again important to note who is, behind these things. Trump has routinely met with oil lobbyists, talking about the Paris Agreement, and which lobbyists, as we were talking about earlier, the American Petroleum Institute, the same ones that, were presented to in the early 1980s about the effects of climate change and chose not to do anything. The Independent Petroleum Association of America, ConocoPhillips, which is of course, a petroleum company, and then Peabody Energy, which is a coal company. Wonder why there's been so much talk about coal as opposed to, wind, solar, and other alternative energies. Now, I understand that may sound slightly grim, and probably half the people don't, disagree with me. But the reality is, if we look at the numbers, and again, I will have the links, it's pretty cut and dry. I think the call to action for us as normal working people is to remember to not fall for the propaganda. Again, if a politician, whether you are a Democrat or a Republican, and you necessarily, because of that, you think, oh, well, they're a Democrat, so I automatically agree with them. We shouldn't think that way. We should look at it from the perspective of what is their claim? What is the merit behind their claim? What does the data say? Is there evidence to support this? And if there's not, then we need to call it for what it is. And if we look at the data and we're able to see, what or who is responsible, then we should fix that problem and hold those responsible accountable, because it's only going to hurt the average person. And like I said before, make the choices you can to help individually with your individual, carbon footprint, as they say. Do things, don't litter, recycle, garden if you're able to, but do little things that you can, but don't be pushing that on other people and forget who's really responsible, because that only serves to hurt the average working class person. And make sure to go vote, regardless of, who you support, what you support, that's up to you, but definitely go vote, because we don't have enough people voting. And that's a travesty in a, country like the United States. We need to make that different and make sure that our interests and voices are being represented. So don't forget to do that on November 3rd as well, and sign up early for sure. If you enjoyed this clip, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and check out the full live version of the Wealth for 99 podcast, where we talk finance, economics, and public policy from a working class perspective. We'll see you there.